It's that time again. Time to enter the frightening world of the paranormal. And this time, I want to tell you a true story about the land of mystery and magic, Egypt. It concerns the bizarre events which happened to one of the most respected figures in occult history, Count Louis Hamon. Now, at the end of the last century, Count Louis was one of the most respected occultists and psychic healers. He'd been investigated many times, and never had anyone been able to prove that he used fraudulent methods or had resorted to trickery. Even the great Houdini had failed to destroy this man's reputation. However, my story begins in the year 1890. At that time, the Count was in Luxor, in Egypt. He'd gone there to look into the ancient rituals which had surrounded the lives of the pharaohs. And he also wanted to see if he could learn more about the ways of psychic healing. By all accounts, he was successful in helping many people. Egyptians who were very skeptical of foreigners who claimed powers which they believed were the special preserve of their ancient religions. And by way of thanks, the Egyptians gave Count Hamon many gifts, as money was not the normal way of thanking those who helped them. Some of the gifts were strange and exotic, reflecting the ancient history of the land. But perhaps the strangest gift was given to Count Louis by an old sheikh who had been cured of an unpleasant disease. It was the severed and mummified hand of an ancient Egyptian princess, which, so it was said, possessed powers of great healing. From the moment Count Louis received the hand, he didn't particularly like it, but he accepted it in good grace and packed it away with his other belongings. And then he forgot about it. But very soon, the fortunes of the Count seemed to change for the worse, and bad luck dogged him. His ability to heal people by psychic means deserted him, and he found that his occult practices seemed to suddenly start to go wrong. Nothing much, just that rituals he had practiced for many years stopped producing the results he had come to expect. Several times, he had to cease his occult learning because he became convinced that an evil presence had come to him. He began to have nightmares, something he had never suffered from before. Quite horrific ones, which centered around Egypt, or at least a desert which he assumed to be in Egypt. Then his wife fell ill from an undiagnosed disease, which robbed her of her strength and appetite. And even when she recovered, she suffered from a periodic but intense pain in her right hand and wrist. This went on for a few months, and then, for no accountable reason, the Count suddenly dreamt of the severed hand which he'd been given by the grateful sheikh. And he became convinced that his wife's illness, his bad luck, and the hand were all connected in some way. So he determined to return to Egypt, search out the sheikh who had given it to him, and find out the history of the hand. The year, by the way, was now 1893. This is what he learned when he returned to Egypt. Apparently, the hand had belonged to the daughter of King Akhenaten, the father-in-law of Tutankhamun. In 1357 BC, the daughter had had a furious quarrel with her father about certain religious matters. She had claimed that her beliefs were right, and the royal way of worship was a heresy. As no one was allowed to argue with the pharaoh, not even his own daughter, he decreed, under pressure from the high priests, that his daughter was to suffer death by the most horrible means. He therefore ordered his daughter to be raped by the priests and then be put to death in a way which befitted the terrible crime of questioning the religion of the day. This was a forerunner of the days of the Spanish Inquisition. Once his daughter was dead, the high priests ordered that her right hand was to be cut off and buried secretly in the Valley of the Kings. Now, this was the ultimate punishment, because according to their beliefs, the girl could not enter paradise, as her body was not intact at the time of burial. When Count Hamon learned this story, he decided to get rid of the hand. But nobody wanted it. No museum seemed willing to accept it, using the excuse that it was of little value as an ancient artifact. So eventually, when the Count had utterly failed to dispose of the hand, he locked it away in a wall safe of his London house on his return to England, and he cast the memory of it from his mind. But things did not improve, and over the next few years, the Count's fortunes failed entirely. By the year 1922, things had come to a head. He was beset by creditors, and bankruptcy was just around the corner. And then, on an impulse, he remembered the hand again, and he and his wife went to the wall safe and opened it for the first time in 29 years. Sure enough, the hand was still there. But to their horror, they saw that it had changed. After 3,200 years, the hand had begun to soften with new flesh. The Count, even though he had never been afraid of the unknown before, was terrified. He decided there and then to destroy the hand and rid his life of its evil influence. The only thing he insisted upon was that it should be given the best burial possible as a means of appeasing the unquiet spirit of the High Princess. So, he borrowed some money from a friend, and he and his wife took passage to Egypt. Once in Luxor, they began the ritual for the dead, which was to accompany the burial of the hand. And on November the 28th, 1922, the Count gently laid the now soft hand in a velvet-lined box and began to read from the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead. As he closed the book and took up the box to transport it to the Valley of the Kings, there was an almighty crack of thunder, and their room was plunged into darkness. Suddenly, the door flew open, and the room became intensely cold. And there, framed in the doorway and lit by an unearthly light, was the figure of a woman. In the Count's own words, she wore the apparel of old Egypt, with the serpent of the House of Pharaohs glittering on her tall headdress. The figure stood there motionless for a few moments, and then slowly extended its right arm towards the Count. He saw that it ended in a raw and bleeding stump. The figure entered the room slowly and bent over the box which the Count had dropped on the floor. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. And so did the severed hand. The Count and his wife were treated by the local doctor for severe shock, but not before they'd written down a full account of what they had seen. Because of his reputation as an occultist, the Count's words were not doubted. And I have to admit that I do not doubt them either. I've read the various accounts written by Count Hamon, and there's a definite ring of truth about them. Interestingly, from that moment on, the Count's fortunes took a turn for the better, and he died several years later in more comfortable circumstances. There's a strange postscript to this tale. In 1944, during the war, a soldier went to the Valley of the Kings on leave. During his visit, he unearthed what he thought was an old stone. But upon further examination, he found that it looked to be a severed hand. According to Egyptian law, he handed it over to the museum in Luxor. And it's recorded in the museum records that the curator at the time refused point blank to accept it and ordered the soldier to return it to the exact spot where he had found it. But on the way back into the desert, a jeep in which the soldier and a friend were riding suddenly and mysteriously seemed to rear up for no apparent reason. The young soldier was flung from the vehicle and killed when his head struck a boulder nearby. His friend was completely unhurt. And just before the accident, they had both noticed what looked like a cloud of sand shaped like a person materialize in front of them and cause the jeep to crash. Was the cloud of sand really the shade of the High Princess? Who knows? But if you are ever in Egypt and you go to the Valley of the Kings, take care. Don't pick up any stones from the sand, especially if they're shaped like a hand. you might just incur the wrath of an unfortunate young lady who was doomed to wander the realms of the undead for all eternity.